Everybody ready? Ready. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us here this evening. Super excited to be with you all. Listening to Katie's introductions reminds me that I really need to go and update my bio, and I have not, which have not been updated in like 15 years. Busy crew here. So I want to go ahead and get us started. Oh, we have that word. There we go. I want to go ahead and get us started in this conversation. You know, all of you all have covered Florida politics, a great wealth of knowledge here on the stage. And I'm wondering that at a time when trust in journalism, really journalism, not just media, but journalism is shifting, what does it feel like to report from the front row of Florida politics right now? Who wants that? Because it's way different from 2008.
Scary as hell. It's scary as hell because they're suing I'm not speaking for everyone else, and just maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm a coward at heart, but there's news outlets and entertainment companies are cutting deals with the White House, paying millions of dollars for if they're targeted, so that higher education institutions are doing the same. First Amendment rights are being eroded in real time as we watch, and so there's I think more about putting. I'll give you an example. Tonight, there was a lawsuit that was filed. The Attorney General filed a lawsuit accusing Planned Parenthood of RICO and FDUPTA false and deceptive advertising for claiming advertising that medication abortion is safer than Tylenol, and seeking $350 million in sanctions and other fines, and losing their licenses, their state licenses. And as I was thinking about this, before I was saying I want to talk about this. I've been dying to talk about this because I just got done debating this with myself. Do I want to write about this? Is this something that I want to elevate? And because then I'm somehow making it real, but it is real. It's a lawsuit that was filed, so it's real. We have to document it. But where I was really starting out to go was I was reaching out to Planned Parenthood, and I was getting ready to email some things, and I said, I need to call. I'm afraid to put in writing what I really think about this, and even the fact that I'm afraid to put in writing what I think about it, or that some of the questions that I wanted to ask, I didn't want to put in writing because I was concerned that they might be used in discovery. And we've had discussions in our newsroom about texts and emails and how we communicate about the people that we cover. I believe that I am fair and balanced in my reporting, and I also am a human being who has opinions about things, and been around for a minute, and so I really have opinions about things. Mary Ellen, you're on the other side now, so you don't have to. You're allowed to have opinions, but anyway, thank you for letting me get that off my chest, because this is something that just happened literally before I walked out the door to get here. So I say scary as hell.
I think that's real, Dara. I got subpoenaed for the second time in my career a month ago. We are living in really interesting times, and I'm wondering, Mary Ellen, Alex, how are you guys? Is anything changing for you in how you're approaching your practice of reporting?
Well, I can. No?
I was hearing it.
You can hear me? Okay. I'm in a very different position than I was when I was at the Miami Herald for 20 years. Because I'm at an organization that has enormous amounts of resources, and they will back me up. That is night and day from where it is with most local journalism organizations right now, and I think that makes a very big difference in how you approach things. Because I was subpoenaed this year for something I wrote in 2021, based on. It was just an attempt to interrogate and basically weaponize the process. It was over redistricting, and thankfully I appealed to the Miami Herald lawyers, and they still defended me, even though I was no longer employed there. But this is a new situation, I think, and it does, I think, have a chilling effect at a time where there are too few of us holding people to account. Now, one of the things I will say about trust is that truth never has an expiration date, and as long as we are holding to the truth. I think we learned this election just on Tuesday night that a lot of the things that the media has been reporting, people are starting to realize we were reporting what was true. Remember Project 2025? People are starting to, connect the dots, and I think that gives me hope, in the sense that people will trust that what we're doing can't be just dismissed by demagogues on, trying to weaponize the media.
Hello. I mean, I agree with what these two journalists have said. Mary Ellen's right. She is a little bit more on the opinion side today. So, Mary Ellen. I feel like lately, I just feel like it's such a privilege to be a journalist. Like, I think it's like one of these things where, like, now that it's, people are turning in their press badges at the Pentagon, and, you can look around at the Florida press corps and see, like, who everyone works for. It's not all legacy media anymore. And so I guess I feel like it feels like more precious than ever to do it. And yeah, I mean, every time I get my badge cleared every year, I'm like, okay, we're going back. And like every time I win an argument with a guard outside of a committee room where he's trying to tell me I need to check my bag, and I'm like, no, I am a member of the press. Like, you have verified my badge. Like, I've already done all the work here. Like, I get to go in with my bag. And so, like, those just feel like small victories that remind me, like, this is how these institutions really stay around. It's just people showing up and being professional on both sides. So, yeah, I mean, it is scary, and I totally agree with that. And, there is a low level of trust in the media, but at the same time, you go out every day and you win your stories and you win your sources, and I feel like as long as there's a marketplace to do that, journalism will exist. And it'll be really hard to, like, 100% get rid of that ritual, because it is very much baked into politics. And so, Lawrence and I just did this panel at the Florida bar, I think, on Tuesday. And it was really cool to see all of the young reporters who go to that workshop still. And Fresh Take Florida, college program is really filling in the gaps there. But, it was still cool. And these people, some of them are going to go around and have long careers. So that's exciting.
I love that. I tell people all the time, like, journalism isn't dying. It's just evolving. And every day is sort of bringing something new within our industry. And, when you all first joined the press corps, what surprised you the most about how things really work in Tallahassee versus maybe how you thought it worked? Did you guys have surprises?
I can't remember.
I
Add 10 more years to my.
We were grizzled by now. But.
I actually started in Tallahassee over 35 years ago, which is kind of seems like an eon ago. It is. It's a generation. And when I started, there were so many reporters, and they were fiercely competitive, and there were legislators from both parties. Democrats were on the decline, Republicans were on the ascension, and they cooperated with each other. They worked together. So now everything's flipped. Things are remarkably polarized and partisan, and I think we have, out of pure necessity, we had the Miami Herald Tampa Bay Times Bureau merge 12 years ago, more than that now, because we had to. So there's collaboration happening in the media, and that's just shocking, kind of a surprise that things move that direction.
How about you? What surprised you when you first started? Did you have anything that you were like, seriously? This is what
Yeah, I was surprised at how male it was.
Yeah.
It's still very male. We have like these periods where women come in, but men stick around. I don't know. They just are everywhere. And, like, I was covering the abortion restriction debate a few years ago, and I was freelancing at the time. I was freelancing for the New York Times, and they only wanted like the one story where the bill passes, both chambers, not covering like a return of the screw. But I was still there covering it. I'm a health reporter, so I cared a lot about it. And just the guys in the room while that debate was going on, I was the only woman in that gallery. And they were just like making jokes and cutting it up, and it was just astonishing. It still astonishes me how this is, at the end of the day, like a small southern town. And it has the culture of that. Like, two of my first big stories were sexual misconduct stories, because I came into the Capitol and I was harassed like every 5 seconds. Like, once Me Too happened, it was like, okay, well, these stories are just going to now write themselves because it's Tallahassee. So, yeah, that was and continues to be the most surprising thing to me.
Florida over the decades has really become this national political bellwether, right? Driving legislation, policy, you see it being mirrored in other states. But now that Florida is solidly red, will the state continue to hold that same level of influence, or has the tide shifted? And the second part of this question is, where does Florida go now? Does it lose some influence maybe? Let's talk about this, because I'm actually genuinely curious about your takes. I saw you shaking your head now.
I have always thought that Florida is the most interesting state to cover as a political reporter, because we were a bellwether for so long. In fact, because of our demographics and, the aging population, the tourist draw, the fact that we have this dichotomy, the coastal wealth and the inland, poor, we had so much that the rest of the country could learn from, and we were almost a decade ahead of every trend that ever happened in America. And so what happened in Tallahassee, as they dealt with growth, as they dealt with aging, as they looked at inequities, the creative minds that could have found solutions, this was the petri dish to do it in. And for a while, and I think it was the 90s and maybe even the first part of Jeb Bush's term, this was a place for that kind of innovation and creative thinking. But both parties lost their way. And we have now gotten to the point, and I think it's especially true with the Republican Party, is that they have abandoned any fresh thinking and ideas. I mean, you don't need to look very far and think of how many years of our lives did we spend covering our opposition to Obamacare up here. And really, we started with Mike Herodopoulos and the constitutional amendment that was going to prevent us from expanding, into any Medicaid.
It was Rick Scott.
And then Rick Scott became governor based on that. But the whole point is that they never had an alternative. And here we are again, a government shutdown because they don't have an alternative. And I think that, so I guess my bottom line about the bellwether is that we have lost our place there. We are no longer a bellwether except for the bad stuff. And we were the first state to ban the books, to punish school boards for DEI and trans stuff. So you know what I'm saying. The bellwether we are now is a negative one.
I mean, I guess what sort of do we still hold national influence? I guess is
I think
is a bigger
for the
question.
Republicans. I think we do for the Republicans, and it's kind of interesting. I'm curious to know what you guys think about this, because with this little Trump versus DeSantis thing, is our Republican panache beginning to tarnish a bit? I think possibly, but if you look at Project 2025 and look at what the Trump administration is doing, is particularly on some of these culture war issues, Florida did pave the way for a lot of this. Florida also was a model for other kinds of far right. I say far right, but like with the gun legislation, we for many years were the model for those bills, the Stand Your Ground, and we're seeing some of this now with our Attorney General really going in hard on the open carry, and I think that's going to be interesting to find out where the courts end up resting with that, whether you can bring them into courtrooms and in schools and other places. I think that's going to be interesting to watch. But back to your question, I think for Republicans, Florida is still kind of a shining city on the hill. For Democrats, and you know what's kind of, I've been entertained by this since Tuesday's elections. The Republicans have been torn between, there's nothing to see here, right? It was just Democrats winning in Democratic places. And then all the New Yorkers are going to run to Florida, and now the debate is whether we're going to keep them out by tariffing them or building a border wall. And I think it's lost on them. Oh, wait a minute. If the people who are abandoning New York because of New York City, because of their new mayor, I think they would be like-minded. So why you'd want to tariff them out of the state, I'm not quite sure. But that's the level of their analysis, I guess.
I don't know. I think it's hard to predict this kind of thing because it's like Republicans got a supermajority in both chambers in 2020. And you would have thought that, then everything would be even more controlled and more efficient. And it was for a while, but then this year, it was that supermajority that incentivized Republicans to fight so much. And so even though we're not getting, meaningful Democratic pushback, now there are Republicans who are pushing back. And that's reflected in the federal government. And I just think that there's, so much mirroring that goes on in our state versus the federal government that, it's still the third largest state in the country. And I would say it was more politically relevant than ever this year, and it's been solidly red for a while, there's like 1.3 million more registered Republicans. So I would never count Florida out.
Did you wanted to add, Dara?
No,
You're standing ready at the mic.
It's fine. No.
What? Why?
No,
What?
Next question.
No, okay. Next question.
I agree with you.
How do you all balance and really navigate sort of being tough and fair, and at this time when lawmakers, they can choose their own media adventure show, right? They can just run to whomever and say their spiel. How do you get your calls returned? How do you make sure they're still calling you back when they can go to other outlets that'll give them and say nice things about them?
Yeah, I think that one of the first things, when we were talking about sort of the changing nature of journalism, I do think it's, you all are very sophisticated in here, and so you all know this, but there are now a lot of outlets that are very decidedly partisan, and Florida has a number of them, and the legislators and the state leaders have access to these, their podcasts. They're not just podcasts, they're new, they're, I hate to call them news.
They're ecosystems, right? They have radio shows, they have podcasts, they have online,
But I feel like I'm keeping my access through this little podcast that I have, and it's amazing to me that it's gotten so popular with the legislators, and I walk around in the Capitol or I host these events, and people will come up to me and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, you're that lady with the podcast," and they really are listening. And I actually had the Attorney General on a couple weeks ago, and I thought never in a million years would he agree to do it.
I was just listening to that.
And he came to my office, and I was like, "I'll bring all the gear over to you." "Oh, no, we want to come to," we call it the speakeasy. And the next day, he had one of his people hand walk over a thank you note and one of these challenge coins. Yeah. So it's very interesting. And then I started worrying because I had a bunch of different Republican leaders, and I was like, "Oh my God, now they think I'm the Republicans' go-to girl," and stuff like that, because I'm filled with self-doubt as a neurotic person. But so I feel like this is my kind of way of keeping a little bit of an edge with the legislators and keeping access. I think the younger people, you all are in the Capitol more than I am, and
Well, you don't have to be.
yeah.
Soft flex.
Yeah. So that's one of the things I do. And I will say also about the podcast is, when I said it's scary as hell, it's also can be it feels almost Sisyphean nowadays when you're covering the news. It's so scripted. Everything is going to come out the way, like Mary Ellen said, we had days, the Terry Schiavo days, right? When we had divided legislators, when Republicans would join with the Democrats and block bad stuff from happening. And that doesn't happen anymore. So it's a lot of kabuki theater. And after 30 years, it can be like, why? What's the point? And for me, just personally, I have this podcast, and I get really excited about doing it, and that keeps my reporting fresh for me, and it keeps me. It's really what keeps me going.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think people keep coming back to you? What do you think the allure is?
I think I'm fair. I really try to be fair. Mm-hmm. I mean, my friend who's sitting here came tonight to watch this. you know, my friends know how I think. I think you can probably guess how I think is just based on what we're talking and how I'm talking tonight. But I think I have fought really hard over the past almost 30 years to be unbiased in my reporting and to treat people, to understand that these are flawed human beings that we're covering. They're individuals with families, and no matter how, you know, much bravado they show when they're in front of the microphone or when they're sitting across from you with the headphones on, they really are vulnerable human beings who are flawed. And I try really hard to look for the humanity in the people that I cover and to make a personal connection with them on that level.
You know, I think that's brilliant. Authenticity,
Yeah.
right? And trust and mutual respect go a long way. I used to say you catch more flies with honey,
Right.
you know, but that doesn't mean being a sucker,
That's right.
you know, and there's a line, right? There is a line. And I'm curious for y'all, is that true for you as well, and the relationships that you both have formed over the years? How do you keep them calling?
Well, I would like to kind of make what has changed over the years dramatically is the manipulation of information that we get. And so there used to be a time where we could call up an agency and just get, I want to, you know, you put out this press release, I need to understand more about it. Do you have a subject matter expert I could talk to who could help me explain, if we do this property tax relief proposal, what would the implications be? Or, you know, just straight up information that is disappearing.
There's not even a name of a person
No,
at
it's-
an agency.
Right, it
It's
used
a
to be
general-
public information officer,
Mhm.
now it is public information gatekeeper.
Mhm.
And their job is to manipulate what we write.
Mhm.
So, I will give great credit to both of these women because I think they are doing a great job still getting information despite the barriers that have been erected for the last really 20 years. Because this is one little fact. If you are in government, especially if you're, you know, in a position that doesn't require, well, like a select exempt position, for example, or you're elected, you want to be relevant. I think we've all figured out that the people that want to be relevant also want to tell us what they think. So even though the gatekeepers won't let us get to things, we know we can keep calling, and if we know enough people, we'll still get the information. I mean, and I think Alex can talk about some of her remarkable efforts. And the other thing that's happened is you just can't give up. I mean, think about how many times you have triaged 5 different directions to get to a piece of information that has led to the remarkable reporting that she's done on the Hope Florida stuff. Because you just don't give up, right? And so they can put all the barriers they want, but as we are learning with the administration in Washington, people want information out of them. So.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And, you know, my husband, Lawrence Maurer, is my reporting partner. He's not here tonight because he's actually working next door on a draft of our investigation. So kudos to him. But we actually went door knocking this weekend. So, you know, we do that now. I mean, we've always done it, but now it's become more regular in our reporting because I agree with all these things. Like, people naturally like to tell you what's going on. People love to gossip. They love to share information. And it's like that ritual I was talking about before. As long as you have enough people who understand how information gets shared and are willing to share it, then you don't need the spokespeople who have been weaponized against us. And, you know, and like the best way to get them to talk to you is just to break news. And I think like every time you break news, you're really showing sources, like, it's not the only thing you're doing, but you're showing sources like, I know how to get big stories across the finish line, like, you can trust me. Clearly, other people have trusted me before, and then they'll be a lot more receptive to talking to you.
Yeah, you're awesome.
You are. You
Well,
slay.
you guys are awesome.
I guess this question, really kind of following up on that, Alex, is for you because you've covered such really big and deeply impactful stories. Is there an emotional toll? When you were covering the massive sexual harassment and assault story, that one was huge. When you broke Hope, Florida, that one was huge. I'm sure the governor's office was quite displeased. But is there an emotional cost?
But there's nothing to see there.
Nothing. I'm sorry. I know nothing. I saw nothing. But is there an emotional cost for you when you are covering those types of stories, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah. I mean, I know there is an emotional cost, and I probably should deal with it better. But for me, it's like the hunt of the story is, and I'm like a compartmentalized person. Like, especially the sexual harassment stuff, because I had been harassed myself in the Capitol, and so I empathized with the people that I was reporting on, and I think that in particular was like emotionally challenging. But I had cancer twice. Like, these things do not compare realistically in any way, shape, or form to the emotional cost that was and continues to be. And I'm just grateful I get to be around to still document this stuff. And that's the cost, is thinking about a day maybe when you can't for whatever reason. It's just a burden, because it's like that's really where the burden is for me, like, knowing how special it is that we still get to do this thing called journalism.
I mean, she's done this amazing work, and it's really an honor and a privilege to be sitting here next to you. And I feel exhausted. I feel like it's a Sisyphean task. I feel like I'm rolling that boulder up, and I'm not doing anywhere near the level of work that you're doing. And I just, everything. I also get like deja vu all over again sometimes. I think for me that the political stuff now, I'm kind of inured to it. Just thinking back over the past 20 years, the story that I felt the most emotionally battered by was the mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. When those kids came up here and they were marching in the halls and they were, demanding some sort of concessions from the legislature, and that was really hard to be listening to their stories and telling their stories and connecting with them. And then now that there's an effort to undo some of the gains that were made, that hurts my heart.
Because it was intense. It was visceral.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that they were pleading, they were crying, and you can't say they were acting, right?
Yeah, which is like 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks after it happened, they were
wrong.
up here. Yeah,
it was wrong, and you saw the legislature respond to that really in the moment,
in a way that they would not do today. They wouldn't do it today, though, Lynn.
The advantage was that it happened right in the middle of the legislative session when Marjorie Stoneman Douglas massacres happened. It was Valentine's Day, and there were 2 weeks left of the session.
That's right.
And they were in a corner.
They were, but do you disagree with me? Do you think that would pass today if the same thing happened?
I think they would have done something. They would have to do something. but it may not look that way. I mean,
Locks on school doors and whatever. They would have done any kind of stuff, Mary Ellen.
It's very likely that they would not have. I mean, you got to give Rick Scott a lot of credit because he was the one that ultimately pulled that together. And yeah, there was a shooting in Tennessee, Covenant shooting that happened, and there was like a mile of people that marched onto the Capitol, and the Tennessee legislature did nothing. So yeah, I agree with you. Things in that regard have changed, and that is a good example of something that was emotionally. It was remarkable because legislators were moved. I mean, I talked to the Senate president then was Bill Galvano, and he was invited to go and look at the school while it was still, with police tape all around it. And he came back and he was shaken. And he decided that he was not going to not do something that year. I'm sorry, it was Joe Negron that was the Senate president, but he was the majority leader. And anyway, it was remarkable. Yeah, but I agree with that.
Mary Ellen, you've covered politics for a while. And you earned a Polk Award for your coverage of the migrant flights. What does it take to pursue a story that powerful people don't want told? And how did you do it?
Well, the migrant flight story was one that it just was basically a decision that Miami Herald made that I wonder if they could be able to do today. They basically just decided that we were going to take a couple of our reporters and send them to San Antonio and talk to the people that were there. And then in the process, we worked on getting the public records and we showed up in Destin and walked, tried to find everybody that was involved in it. And it really was just sort of, we weren't going to let go. But there's two things that I think. We threw a lot of reporters at it, and we had resources. We put money behind that. That the Herald is still doing amazing work, but they just closed their Washington, D.C. bureau. The entire McClatchy at a time when Washington news is pretty important to Americans. So, it's just a really tough time. And so the way we did it was putting resources behind it, because I think there's a lot of newsrooms that have the capacity for reporters who know their sources to do a really good job with a story. But what it takes is the commitment from the leadership to say, we're not going to let this go. And really, we didn't. I think the flights were in September. We were writing every piece of it into the next legislative session, into the next year. And I think that made a difference.
Over the years, there have, and I know, Alex, you alluded to this, only really been a handful of women in the press corps at any given time. What advice would you all give to young women who are hoping to do what you do? And if you could advise your younger self, what would you tell her?
No notes on my younger self. She's amazing.
Came in perfect.
Love that woman. I would be like, get to Tallahassee, commit. Lawrence and I just did this bar panel I was talking about, and there were just so many young women in that panel, and I'm like, come stay with us. We gave out our phone numbers. I'm like, tell your editors they don't have to foot the bill. You can come stay with us, we'll have you. because there's a brain drain, and it's because newspapers and editors don't see the value in sending their reporters to Tallahassee anymore, because all they see is their suffering bottom line, and so they're more needed than ever. And just get over here and start reporting and stay with us, and you'll be fine. And stick it out, stick it out. I made a decision to commit, and of course part of that was because I got sick in Tallahassee, but I was also committed before I got sick. And staying in a place like this where there's a Byzantine government, and information is high touch in person, and especially today where so many things are AI driven and remote, it's a really special thing to do, and I hope that more women make that decision.
What keeps you guys doing this work? Some of us are tired, right? Some of us feel like Atlas. Why keep going when the tide feels so strong against? What propels you forward? What drives you?
So I have to say there really aren't many professions where every day is different. The news business is pretty exhilarating in that way. It's not boring. But one thing that keeps me going is I think that we are now in the most important time for journalism in my lifetime. And that's because we are on the cusp of losing our democracy. And I will tell you that I think that if every single column that I write begins with the frame in my head. I don't write about losing democracy, but I write about what is the story I need to tell to help to remind people that this stuff is going on and this is eating away at our ability to represent ourselves, at our voices. So really, I started thinking about this when Rick Scott was governor. And he came in and he literally had this inauguration where he had the reporters at his inauguration events where he was bringing in all the lobbyists and legislators. He built a pen and he had us standing there and he literally gave us a 8.5 by 10 sheet of paper that said press on it. And we had to wear that. It was like the red letter. And he actually had a velvet robe. It was a velvet robe that was the cordon area where we had to sit. And that was just the beginning of how they saw us. And I realized then that things are starting, and then access to information declined. And that was just the dress rehearsal for Ron DeSantis. Because when Ron DeSantis came in, he had a pretty smooth first few months, and year and a half maybe. As soon as COVID hit, it all changed. So what I think kept me going and keeps me going is that if we don't push back, there's nobody that is going to push back. We are really one of the last bulwarks. I believe in the court system. I think the court system is doing some remarkable things to keep our democracy safe. But when you get up to the Supreme Court level, that's where all the doubt is. And I do think that when it comes to Congress, they've abdicated their role. So short of that, it's the media, it's the press who's left. And so I think that's what keeps me going.
You ever had a real job? Those things really suck. I've had little inklings of real jobs before, and I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. Because being a reporter is the best. It's amazing. It's amazing to witness, like, I just, like, on my mind lately, like, how cool that is, you just, like, oh, yeah, you can come in the room, like, you get to see what goes on here, and I don't know, it's just a cool job. It's a really cool job. I hope it never goes away. I don't know what I would do, frankly, if I didn't do this.
Well, I already said, I kind of answered this when I said that I have the podcast and I do enjoy that, so that kind of keeps me going. But like Mary Ellen, and also the podcast, I feel like, and sometimes my friends will listen to it and say, you got a little bit over the line there. You need to. So I do feel like I have a little more editorial leeway when I'm being a real person and not just writing a story. But I like Mary Ellen, 100% feel that it is, we have a role to play in ensuring that our democracy survives. And, survives maybe in a different form. I've been thinking a lot about this, that our experiment has lasted for 250 years, and now it maybe is going to look different than it did. And the changes to me are coming so rapidly that we're watching the arc of history in real time. And we're watching the erosion of civil rights in real time. And, to be witnessing that and translating that into something digestible for citizens, for people everywhere, I feel it's really like a calling. And so that's really, as I joke about it being really difficult. Nobody cares if it's hard for a reporter to do their job. It's always been hard. But I do feel that there's a sense of urgency now that maybe I didn't feel 15 years ago. And that calling is, like, I'm more committed to it now than I ever was.
Yeah.
I would agree. I think it takes a different kind of person with deep convictions to do the job that you guys do day in and day out. It's a hard job. Sometimes it's a thankless job, but it's also a job that is absolutely critical to our society.
And that you do.
Yeah. On occasion, I dabble. Yeah, I want to end this on a light note. This question, I thought about it and kind of gave me a giggle. What is the strangest or funniest thing that you've overheard or heard in the Capitol? Do you recall it? I have two that I enjoyed highly, but I'm curious to hear you.
I have one. When Jeb Bush was elected, the Republicans were taking over again, and he was inaugurated, and it was very, very cold on the day of his inauguration. Some of you probably weren't even born then. It was very, very cold, and I was out there in the freezing with my team covering this, and as we were walking, an older couple of women were walking away, and they said, "Oh, look at all the fur coats. It's so great to have the Republicans in charge."
That's really good.
I think mine was the debate over Jay-Z's 99 Problems on the House floor.
Oh, truck nuts. Did you get
Truck nuts was good too. There was also a really good one. I believe it was Chris Smith versus Rhonda Storms and his infamous "Don't piss on me and tell me it's raining." And they were fighting with the apple. Oh, she was. I miss her. That was a good one. Those were better, lighter times. Lighter times. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us here this evening.
Awesome. Do we have any questions? I think we've got like a good 10 or 15. Okay. Go for it.
Hi, thank you so much. My question relates to one of your comments about the migrant flights from Texas and I think it was you sending reporters. So now we have all of these people incarcerated in concentration camps. Who's reporting on what happens to those people? Are they flying out and being deported all the time? How do we find out what's happening to all these people that are saying this is a temporary holding? How long are they staying there? What's happening to them, and how do we find out what's happening?
The way this is, I'm based in Tallahassee. I work for a very small news organization, and so we don't have anybody on the ground. I think when you're talking about the concentration camps, you're probably referring to the detention center in the Everglades. I'm not going to use the name that the state officials have given it because I find it appalling. So I'll just call it the detention center in the Everglades. There, the Miami Herald and other outlets have had reporters on the ground there in the Everglades watching to see which trucks were coming in and out, and so that was one way of getting information about what was happening there, and kudos to them for doing that because it really literally is in the middle of nowhere. The other way I've been reporting on that quite a bit is through the litigation. So making connections with, because I'm all about connections, and but the attorneys have been, there's a number of lawsuits challenging this process and that facility in particular, and they have been documenting some of what's happening there and their inability to locate people once they've been sent there. It's very, very difficult to keep track of what's happening, and I really kudos to the ones who are, and they were down there in the heat of the summer, and it's really a miserable place.
But even local reporters like Anagoni Lasan, the Democrat,
yeah, she's doing a great job. Thank you for mentioning her.
She's doing a really good job. So
yes,
reporters are still covering these stories. Mary Ellen's likely right. I mean, who knows if the Miami Herald would take resources today and set them aside like that. But yeah, I mean, reporters at regular newspapers are still doing a good job because it's now in a lot of different communities. Mm-hmm. So even if you can't fly there, it's happening at home.
Good evening, and thank you all for your insights on everything. I'm just wondering, with all of the media options that we have nowadays and all of the disinformation that's out there, what advice do you have for the average person to ensure that they're turning to the right resources for the correct information?
That's a good one. There we go. I tell people this: double check it through other sources, and double check it through other media sources. If you're finding it in one place and one place only, that might be a bit of a red flag. If you find yourself gravitating toward, say, a right-leaning side, try and figure out, well, what is the other side saying? Because 9 times out of 10, it's being covered. If it's being covered on Fox, it's being covered on CNN. If it's being covered in the New York Times, it's likely being covered in the Wall Street Journal. Diversify your media ecosystem, but be hyper aware of any language that carries inflammatory words, right? Be aware of hyper emotional language. That is 10 times out of 10, 20 times out of 20, right? That is a dead giveaway. We guard our adjectives jealously, as I like to say. Be aware of that and think very deeply about what you're reading, why you're reading it, and what is the intent behind it. One of the things that I have seen a lot is the merging of opinion and advocacy versus journalism. Some people call it advocacy journalism. I will fight over that one because I disagree with it, but that's a story for another day. But cross-check, and it's a hard thing to do. The other thing I'll tell you is be aware of the conversations happening on social media, but who is having those conversations? Is that even a real person? If all the comments sound alike, and they're all carrying the same sort of hyper-inflated, emotional, rage-baiting language, that's a bot. It's a bot, but it takes a lot of consumption. It takes a lot of weeding. It takes a lot of sifting. The other thing I'll say is if something is citing a source, go hunt down that source and read it in full and see if it is cross-referenced elsewhere. And all of these things are really, really difficult because they require a heck of a lot of time. But you have to devote that time in order to get a clearer picture of what's going on. And, I'll tell you it's not easy. I talk to journalism students all the time, and I tell them it's not easy, but it's what you have to do in this media ecosystem. But if you read it on the so-called left, go check the right and see what the different sides are saying. But if you're only seeing it on one side, that's a giveaway. That's a red flag.
You can call me. I'll tell you.
Call Dara.
The other thing I would say is one of the exciting things we have that's happening in media right now is that there are a lot of startup news sites that embrace the same the traditional values that legacy media has had. The only problem is nobody knows enough about them, and there are too many imitators. And the imitators are the ones that are the danger, I think. So I really do believe that we need more independent, nonprofit journalism in local communities all over the place. But until then, a tried and true is still legacy media, because every one of us still holds the same values of checking sources, getting multiple sources before we write anything, making sure it's true, and not being influenced by some partisan motivation.
Hey, I have a question, obviously. How often are you, when you're looking to experts, and especially in environmental issues, how often are you looking to, specifically FAMU, FSU, College of Engineering, or any kind of universities? In Tallahassee, we have a great engineering program, and a lot of doctors over there. And how often are you communicating with academia, especially when it comes to STEM, environmental, clean water, PFAS, all of that stuff that's going on?
All the time. During COVID, we had a behavioral health scientist who was my bestie, who was a graduate of Florida A&M University, who worked at the CDC, and she was in Texas. Go Rattlers. You know, we also had an expert at FAMU School of Public Health who also lent his expertise, Dr. Perry Brown. He was one of the first scientists on the ground during the initial outbreak of AIDS in the 1980s. Extensive research history. Our universities are wealths of knowledge. These are some of the smartest people, I think, anywhere around. And I know for us as public media and as WFSU, you know, we are blessed to be anchored. Florida State University owns our license. Yes, I'm FCC. That's who you yell at. But we are blessed and very fortunate to live here in Tallahassee, where you have two extremely powerful institutions of higher learning, Tallahassee State College as well, where you have new and emergent research happening every single day. So you have experts right here in town that you can pull from. And I know for us, we pull from them frequently. We're also fortunate in this state to have USF, to have Nova Southeastern, to have FIU, to have UN. And every single one of these institutions carries with it sort of different areas of expertise that, you know I draw on, especially if I'm looking for an expert in a certain field. So we frequently turn to those people. Now, lately, because it comes with a caveat, depending on what the issue is, right? On some issues, all of that talent, unfortunately, has become scared to speak.
Yeah,
And
especially
so
for those of us who cover
for them,
politics. If you're
exactly.
trying to talk to somebody, if you forget about talking to a political scientist who works for Florida University anymore.
We have to go elsewhere now. Or we have to find someone who is retired, who is still following, but they're no longer affiliated because they're not worried about their tenure and they're not worried for their jobs. But it depends on the issue now. It depends on the topic, and if it can be perceived as something that is DEI-ish or DEI adjacent or race-related, you're having a harder time. And that's the reality, and it's unfortunate.
But the political science professors are also afraid to talk about it doesn't even have to be a DEI related issue. They really won't talk. They're afraid to draw attention to themselves. They're afraid to criticize the legislature and certainly the governor. I mean, and that's not me opining.
That's the reality.
I have professors who were chairs of political science departments who I've known for 20 years at, I won't say the state's flagship university, but who will take my calls and talk to me off the record, but who will not get quoted in a story anymore.
No.
Because they have families to support.
Yeah, and they have tenure, and those contracts are like paper. They can be shredded at any moment.
Well, they're doing that too.
Hi. First, I just wanted to thank you all so much. If it wasn't for each of you, what happens at the Capitol would happen in the dark. Each of you cover everything that happens there, and the entire state and the country is listening, and that's how people know what's happening in Florida. So I just really want to thank you for your bravery, because we rely on it so much. So first of all, I just want to thank you. My question is, and you sort of alluded to this, Dara, when you were talking about how the Everglades Detention Center and the issue of naming. So the people that name the bills are the ones in charge of what they're called, and so they might call something a Heartbeat Act instead of a 6-week ban, or they may call something wrongful death for an unborn child instead of abusers suing friends and family members who had abortions. So how do you cover, like, how do you talk about that? Because, you know, that's what the bill is called, but just by calling it that, you're influencing readers to think about it in a certain way, and I just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Right. Sometimes, I mean, what I generally do is, and I've been doing this with the detention center in the Everglades, I will write once in the story, dubbed Alligator Alcatraz by DeSantis and Republican leaders, because everybody knows it by that name, and if I just write about it without referring to it by that name, people might not know what I'm talking about. So generally, if it's an emotionally charged or politically charged name, I will identify it in that way. It just dubbed I don't think ever in writing about the 6-week abortion ban that I ever called it the heartbeat bill. Did you ever do that? No. No.
Some names are catchier than others.
I mean, to be perfectly honest, if it's something really so silly, like what's the communism thing or whatever, you know, I'll put it in quotes, but if it's something like that, if it's patently false, I don't feel obligated to quote the name of the bill.
Just describe it.
Yeah.
That's like the hardest part of the job. Like it takes a long time to learn how to just describe things without feeling like it's your opinion. You know, you're just describing the way it actually is, and you become a better reporter and writer through that process. And I think that's why it can be a shame to have people like just churn through Tallahassee because they leave before they develop that skill, you know, and then it becomes frustrating for advocates like your organization to feel like you're running PR, you know, against the name of a bill, but, you know, over time journalists, they kind of outgrow that.
I think it's really important that we use our brains and not just write down everything that people say and regurgitate it, and I think that's becoming more and more of a challenge because they feel less obligated to speak truthfully, or they're more politically, there's just more political rhetoric that's, you know, part of how they communicate. And so I think the danger is for younger, less experienced reporters that you just write down what they say without either putting it into context or
because we're not stenographers.
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
and in broadcast, you know, we have a bit of an easier time because we're very word limited. So I always tell people, what does it do? I don't really care about its name. I give it the bill number and tell me what it does. You know, especially if it has an extremely long, ridiculous name. I'm not going to waste my precious 35 seconds burning 15 of them on the name. I'm more concerned with what does it do, and I'll give you the number, and then you can go read the superfluous name that they have put on it. But definitely teaching young reporters, you know, I know that they said this, but does this make sense to you? Because it don't make sense to me.
Yeah.
You know, you need to dig a little bit harder, because this is not, I know they said it, but just because they said it doesn't make it true.
Right.
You know, and breaking people, I think, of that habit and getting them to think a lot deeper about what is the true meaning. That is the thing that takes time. I know my first year in the press corps, I don't think I spoke. Pretty sure everybody thought I was a mute because I was learning.
Yeah.
You know, I was absorbing. I was trying to work it out. And when people cycle in and out, they're not afforded the time to really get the deeper level of knowledge that they're going to need to know to carry them through the rest of their career. And I think that is probably the biggest threat that I see, which is the churn.
Churn's bad.
Sorry, I went out on a tangent.
That's great. We'll do one more audience question, and I'm going to pull rank unless Lynn wants to do the last one. Okay.
I want to echo what others have said. I so admire you. I admire your tenacity. I admire your mastery of the English language. You know, you're just remarkable. Thinking about your years in media, how have things changed, or have they changed, in terms of the control or the restrictions that you feel maybe from the owners of your media organization or your editors? Has there been a change in terms of the editorial restrictions and control? Are they being more careful, or are you allowed to write? And I know you self-govern to some extent too, that you're careful yourselves in what you write, but have you felt a change in terms of the heavy hand of management?
I'll take a stab and then you guys can take it. I don't really think that there's that much of a change in the culture of media, to be honest. It's kind of like a military. It's very like top down, and people have different roles that they play. It's always been like that. Newspapers are surprisingly stodgy places, but the big change that's happened is just the money. There's just no money. So if people are making bad editorial decisions, are they thinking about getting sued? Probably, you know. Maybe they're not like as fearless because they just are broke. So that's why Mary Ellen is such a good advocate for new startup news publications, because, you know, they'll have to be the future at some point, sadly. But yeah, it's just they're broke. That's all. That's the big difference.
I think that is a perception that a lot of people have, that news reporters are told what to write. And honestly, in my entire career, there was some time where I had so much on my plate that my editor would prefer me to work on the less controversial stories, right? And that got to me. But I think that was just because we only had so much bandwidth. This was going to take a lot of work. It was going to take extra effort, another layer of oversight with having the legal team review it and all of that, which we were used to doing. But it was just a matter of self-limitation because of the resources and the fact that I didn't have enough time in the day to cover all the things that we were supposed to be covering. That's really the only limitation I had. And it got to the point where I was frustrated because I felt, I could do more, honing in on this issue. But I don't think there is that much. I think that the limiting factor today is just we have a newsroom that has so few people, and you talk about, there was a time where we'd actually have our editors, and they'd question us about the use of the name of a bill. There was two layers of editors. There was your frontline editor, then there was a copy editor, and oftentimes if it went to the front page, there was yet another editor. Now there's just one. And that editor has so much to do, they don't really push back on your terminology. So if you're not changing it yourself, it's not getting changed. So I think it's just that to me is my experience.
Yeah, I think I've been fortunate to work in public media where we're so hyper local and locally governed that we don't answer to anyone, which has given us a lot of room for creativity, right? And to create and to innovate and to do something like explaining the legislative process in song, which I did, part 1 and part 2, and won a medal for it, I will have you know. But I I look at our ecosystem now, right, where in public media our entire lives have been upended, and we are now in a weird place because we have to reinvent ourselves. And I think we're thinking a lot differently, not necessarily from a place of will we get sued, but how do we keep doing what we are doing with far fewer of the resources than we have historically had at our disposal. And we don't know. You know, I tell people WFSU, our station, we've been here for 75 years, and we are going to be here for another 75 years, long past the time I am gone. But what that new future looks like, we don't know. But we are blessed to have, I think, with the loss of federal funding comes a tremendous opportunity, because I think in a lot of ways public media may have held itself back. And now that threat is no longer there. So the question for us is, what do we unleash?
You guys, as an example of the evolution of public media and media in general, I work for a wire service, so I don't feel any pressure really about like writing a story to appease any particular person. But the public radio stations in Florida are using pieces of my podcast weekly, and
we are, and we love you for it.
And a really great example of collaboration, and we don't charge them for it. The podcast goes out for free. I see more newsrooms doing this aside from, of course, what you're talking about, the nonprofit is really going to be, I think, the only way for companies the news outlets to sustain themselves. Our small wire service, the News Service of Florida, was bought about 3 years ago by a company that owns many other news or data collection. I'm not even sure what they do, and they're struggling. There's been layoffs after layoffs after layoffs. So I think collaboration is really critical to move forward.
Awesome. Well, I know we're getting really close to the end, but I just have a question for all four of you, and you can answer one, two, or all three of these, and maybe if we can go my left to the right. But the story you're most proud of, the story you're least proud of, or did you ever ask a question in a press conference that you immediately wish that you could not ask?
I think for me, the story I am most proud of, there are two. It was my series Committed, how children became the fastest growing population in Florida to be Baker acted. I was really pleased with that reporting. It had been on my heart ever since I read about a little girl in Jacksonville who was in second grade, and she was sent for involuntary psychiatric evaluation. And it stayed with me, and it was a personal story for me because I read in her story, I saw my nephew who has ADHD, and I recognized that child, and I knew that could have been my nephew, and it touched me, and it spurred me to really dive into this. And then the second piece of reporting I'm most proud of is our podcast, Not So Black and White, Tallahassee's Divided History. It's been downloaded 267,000 times, which is pretty much the population of Tallahassee. And thank you. Both of those were hard. They were painful. They were personal. And if I died tomorrow, I think those would be my two crowning achievements. As for the story I am most embarrassed about, when I first started, I told the story of Lucky, the three-ringed neck duck who got shot by a hunter, stuck in a freezer, and lived. He lived! But at the time, my voice was about 3 octaves higher, and I was new to broadcasting, and I sang. So I was lucky!
I'll just be really quick, and I think, the stories that I cared the most about, which isn't really a direct answer to your question, I think the stories that stayed with me the most was my coverage of gay marriage being legalized, and I was the only reporter who was invited to the wedding of one of the couples that was that were the plaintiffs in one of the and not in the Obergefell lawsuit, but in one of the lawsuits in Florida. And they were my interracial gay cowboys in Mariana. And so I went out there to their wedding, and I'm still friends with them today. And then the other story that really it's a little story that probably nobody else would remember, but I was covering Katrina, and I was in Biloxi, and Biloxi was like a war zone, and my photographer and I were over there walking around taking pictures, and we heard this dog barking, and there was a boat in the middle of a parking lot, and a sailboat just resting there on the side, and I said, we have to go get that dog, and we went up, and there was actually an elderly man was in the boat with his dog, and he was injured, and so we gave him some food and some water and contacted his daughter, and the next year I got a call from his daughter. We actually took him, got anyway, and I got a call from his daughter on the 1-year anniversary of Katrina, thanking me for what we did.
I mean, the story I'm most proud of is definitely the whole Florida stuff that we've been reporting this year. That story was a story about timing, I think, where we managed to break it open during the middle of the legislative session. And it was just like the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, effort, why those activists at that time were so effective, and it's because the tragedy struck in the middle of the legislative session. So for me, that was like a personal victory in terms of like bringing investigative work to a daily beat and figuring out like how to do that. One of the stories I regret, so it's just one of these things that it stays with you. It was the very first story that I published with Miami Herald, and one of the few stories I've had to write a correction on because I said that it passed the legislature when it really had just passed one of the chambers, and then had to go back, and it ended up passing the next day. But that was that embarrassing. And I had been kind of like out of the game for a while because I was dealing with treatment and stuff. So I was like coming back to full-time reporting, and yeah, that was like not a very fun first conversation with my
I spent a lot of time in my career writing, doing accountability reporting, and I have to say, my coverage of Florida Power and Light has been some of the most personal impact on me. Right? They at the end of one of the last things they did ultimately was run a front page ad trying to condemn me and all that stuff. It was remarkable. But I think
proud of you for that.
I think the most fun piece I've ever done on FPL was when I got an insider gave me audio tape from a meeting in which they had their lobbyists admitting that the constitutional amendment on the ballot was intended by them. That was supposed to be pro-solar. It was intended to prevent solar, rooftop solar. And once we blew that, the word got out. Everybody wrote about it, and it failed. So it took that, but that was fun. The most stupid, embarrassing thing I did is back in my days, I would before I started at the Miami Herald, I was at the Palm Beach Post, and I covered medical malpractice. And I did a profile on one of the top lawyers in big law firms in West Palm Beach that were fighting medical malpractice reform. And I went to their office, and I was wowed by the opulence. And they had, I described it with great detail, and I described these concrete figurines they had out front as gargoyles, and I was really wrong. And they were lions. Now, gargoyles sounded way more, but those lawyers never let me forget. Forever.
Thank you all so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time for the room, but I just wanted to say quickly, the second part of our mission, defending democracy, I think that journalism, as we say, it's the fourth branch of government. The other part of our mission at the League is that women power democracy, and we have the power to do this, and I can't think of 4 women that are a better example of doing that than these 4 up here. So let's please give them a